I'm Dr. Gail Gross. Two guests will be joining me today. Dr. Daniel Goleman is an acclaimed psychologist who has received 2 Pulitzer Prize nominations for his New York Times articles on behavioral science and the brain, and was elected a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Daniel Goleman is also a best-selling author. His groundbreaking book, Emotional Intelligence, advances the idea that human competency in the areas of self-awareness, self-discipline, persistence, and empathy are a much better indicator than IQ of long-term success in a person's life, work, and relationships. As a result of his work in this area, he co-founded the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning at Yale University's Child Studies Center and is currently the co-chairman of the Consortium for Social Emotional Learning in the Workplace at Rutgers University. Dr. Goleman's latest book, Destructive Emotions, has once again broken new ground with its description of a scientific dialogue between the Dalai Lama and a group of eminent psychologists, neuroscientists, and philosophers. Sharon Salzberg is one of America's leading spiritual teachers and writers. She has been a student of Buddhism since 1971 and has studied and practiced meditation with eminent Burmese, Indian, and Tibetan teachers. She is a co-founder of the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies and the Insight Meditation Society. She is a contributing editor for Oprah's O, and her writing has appeared in Time Magazine, Real Simple, Marabella, Good Housekeeping, and MSN.com. She has also written several books, including Loving Kindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness, and A Heart as Wide as the World. Her latest book, Faith, describes how faith, regardless of our religious orientation or beliefs, can help us learn to trust our own deepest experiences, leading to a more fulfilling and peaceful life. Daniel Goleman, Sharon Salzberg, welcome to the program.
Good to be here. Thanks.
It's so exciting for me to have the two of you. We're bridging spirituality and science, spirituality and science, and it's so amazing in this ancient wisdom for the 21st century that we are really seeing scientists opening their hearts, so to speak, to the world of spirituality.
Well, and we're seeing people who are doing spiritual practices with real persistence and integrity and depth coming into scientific labs.
Yes.
This has never happened before in human history. It's quite an exciting moment, Gail.
It's amazing. How did you both begin? What started your spiritual journey that then evolved so that you were able to bring spirituality to practicality, real life experience, and then science? Sharon?
Well, I had been a college student at the State University of New York at Buffalo and took a course in Asian philosophy, which turned out to be a course in Buddhism. And there were 2 things about the course that I found riveting. One was the Buddha's completely open, unafraid, unashamed acknowledgement of the suffering in life. And then the second thing was his completely inclusive invitation to do something about that suffering. He didn't say it was only the special people or the lucky people or the talented people who could do something to turn their lives around. He said everybody could do that, and techniques existed. Those were meditation techniques. And because of that, I went off to India to try to find a meditation teacher.
That's amazing because you were very young, and India was such a foreign kind of environment. I mean, not just somewhere else, but Eastern in philosophy, so totally different from the West. And I think you two met on that adventure. Daniel, tell us about your moment that brought you to India.
And to Sharon.
And to Sharon.
Actually, like Sharon, I started to get interested in meditation during my college years. But perhaps for slightly different reasons. I was feeling very pressured, really hassled, really anxious about things.
Yes.
And along came an opportunity to learn to meditate. Like many people in those years, my first meditation was TM.
Yes.
And what I found was very interesting to me because I realized that if I would meditate in the morning 20 minutes, in the evening 20 minutes, I felt more relaxed. I felt more alert. I was enjoying things more. And because I was studying psychology, I was interested in this professionally too, because I realized that meditation was psychoactive. It was like Prozac in one sense, at least what I was doing then. I went to Bodh Gaya, India, which is where Buddha was enlightened.
Yes.
And went to a course in Vipassana, it's called, which means mindfulness meditation. And one of the people who was there was Sharon.
Here, here.
So we've known each other for quite a while.
It's so interesting. You really became your own witness, followed a practice, saw that the practice was changing you in a physical way,
Sure.
and paid attention. And
Well, it gave me a hypothesis. And in fact, after I left India, went back to Harvard, I tested the hypothesis. I did my dissertation research on using meditation as a way to help people adapt to stress. And in fact, I found it worked.
You know, how did you measure it, Dan? Because really, scientists for so long have said, you know, how can we really prove this? And in a sense, you did.
I use standard measures, heart rate, sweat response. These increase when we're under stress.
Yes.
And I showed people a short film, that depicts some accidents. And everybody has a reaction to it. You can't help it. It's only natural. But before watching, some people meditated and some didn't. And those that meditated recovered more quickly from the stress arousal. And I think that's the key.
Where did you get the idea to put all of this together in the emotional intelligence book? Where did that thread come together?
I went into science writing. I was at the New York Times for many years.
Yes.
And while I was at the Times, what I'd been doing really in my day-to-day job is tracking new developments in brain science and behavioral science. And I saw that we had really a critical mass of new understanding about emotions, how they work, why we get hijacked so easily, what to do for kids.
Yes.
And I thought, this is more than an article. I can't do it in just 2,000 words. I need to write a book. So that was the book, Emotional Intelligence.
Amazing. Which is really a fascinating... I don't think it's even a concept anymore. Businesses have all adopted this really for their CEOs.
The moment I knew that emotional intelligence had arrived in culture was when I saw it mentioned in Dilbert as a punchline. Then I knew it had
And I
worked.
think it's been in a crossword puzzle.
I'm sure it has, yeah.
Take a moment and tell us, what is emotional intelligence?
Emotional intelligence means nothing more than how we handle ourselves in our relationships. Are we aware of what we're feeling? Can we manage our distressing feelings so they don't interfere with what we're doing? It doesn't mean squelching feelings, because emotions are what make life rich and passionate, but it's the feelings like intense anger or anxiety that can get in the way of life that you want to be able to handle better. Empathy, can you tell what someone else is feeling?
Yes.
And then putting it all together in a skilled way of being with other people. That's emotional intelligence.
Yes. And you say that emotional intelligence actually can be learned. It's not necessarily that you have it or you don't.
It's all learned, in fact. We're understanding that. It's learned from the moment you hold an infant and meet her eye and smile, and she smiles back at you. That's the beginning of a lesson in empathy and connection to other people. And those lessons continue in small ways every day throughout childhood. And if you get the right lessons, then you're going to have a richer, more rewarding life. If you get the wrong lessons, you could end up in jail, a drug addict, miserable, basically.
Yes.
So I think math is important, spelling is important, but if we're not going to leave children behind, we have to look at their personal lives, their emotional lives. What kind of citizen will you be? What kind of husband or wife will you be? What kind of parent will you be? None of the academic subjects help you there. It's all emotional intelligence.
And even leadership has a lot to do with managing people, how to get along with people.
Well, it turns out what distinguishes the star leaders from the average are these abilities. Can you surface a conflict and help people work it out? Can you inspire people? Can you articulate a shared vision so that it stirs not only yourself, but touches the hearts of people that are working with you? That's the kind of attribute that makes a leader someone that people want to follow.
Yes, and we know from studies now that bullies have a problem with empathy.
Well, from leadership to bullies is actually not a bad segue, because some leaders who don't get it actually are bullies.
They take it from the classroom to the boardroom.
You got it,
No
yeah.
question about it.
Yep.
I know what you mean.
The good news, Gail, is that you can help bullies. All of these are
Yes.
learned and learnable skills. There was a
Yes.
wonderful project done at Emory where they had the Atlanta school system select elementary school bullies. And they put them together in a once-a-week club. It wasn't called the Bullies Club. It was called the Fun Club. Because,
Good. Labels are important.
what they did was they matched each bully with a really nice kid.
Yeah.
And they taught them two things: how to read emotions accurately, and how to get along, how to take turns, how to ask the other kid about him.
Yeah.
And guess what? After 8 weeks, they weren't bullies anymore.
Yes.
And this is, I think, the real lesson. All of these abilities can be taught to kids.
Yes.
And when you do that, kids in the teen years avoid the pitfalls. You have fewer drug problems, drinking problems, less unwanted teen pregnancies,
Right.
less violence, and you know what? You have higher scores on academic achievement tests.
Yes.
Kids can learn better.
Absolutely. You know, we're doing a study like that in Houston,
Wonderful.
and we're training parents on the weekends to have empathy and teach these skills to their children, because that is also a link that's missing, that the parents don't have those skills, so they can't pass them on in a certain way.
Oh, that's wonderful, Gail.
That's a
Thank
wonderful
you for doing
idea.
that.
And with faith, you're teaching us that we can have faith even though we may not have religion, even though we may not follow any prescribed program for adopting faith. It is there. It's in our resource, and we just have to awaken that which is us. Tell us how you got this idea.
I asked myself that so many times in the course of writing that book. I thought, what made me? It was a very difficult process, but very profound as well. And I'm curious, actually, I want to ask each of you what role self-awareness plays before I get into it in the development of empathy. Because as you were speaking about that study, it was becoming aware of the emotional contour of someone else's experience, being able to read
Right.
it.
Good
And
question.
from the Buddhist point of view, we would almost say that one of the ways of developing empathy is being in touch with our own, especially painful feelings. When somebody lies to us or steals something from us, we can experience deeply and authentically the discomfort, the loneliness of that, the alienation of that. And so almost naturally, you don't want to impose that on somebody else. You don't want to inflict that on somebody else.
Well, I think you're really onto something. Our data shows, the scientific data shows, the way you're saying is exactly right, Sharon, that empathy is based on self-awareness. If you're tuned out of a range of your own experience, you'll be unable to pick it up in someone else. And there's a very powerful example of this. My brother-in-law is a writer who has specialized in horror and terror. He's a very lovely guy. And at one point, he was going to write a book about a serial killer who's in prison now in California.
Interesting.
Strangled 7 people. And at one point, my brother-in-law asked this guy, how could you have done it? Didn't you feel any pity for your victims?
Yes.
And this guy says, very matter-of-factly, no, I had to turn that part of me off. If I felt any of their distress, I could not have done it. Empathy is a crucial break, inhibitor of human cruelty.
Yes. What is it, do you think, following that thread, that makes us in this culture have less empathy? I mean, you know, we have a war going on right now. We have people being killed on both sides.
I think that there are very powerful and pernicious messages at large in the culture, and we get them everywhere. We get them from advertisements, we get them from magazines, we get them from other television shows. And they say, what counts is me and my world and my desires.
Interesting.
And what that does is to make people self-absorbed. And there's a direct negative relationship between self-focus and lack of empathy for other people. I'll tell you about a very really amazing study. It was done at Princeton at the Theological Seminary. Students were told that they were going to have to do a sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan who stopped and helped someone suffering by the side of the road.
Exactly.
And half of them were told that they were late. and half were told you can take all the time you want, but we need you to go over this other room. As they went to the other building, they passed someone who was in a doorway moaning, "Can you help me?"
Yes.
And very interesting, they didn't stop.
Yes.
Very few of them stopped
Yes.
because they were preoccupied. And the more time urgency they had,
More.
the less likely they were to stop. And think about the lives we lead. It's not just the messages of me first, it's also we've got too much to do, we're overwhelmed,
Exactly.
pressured. So we have less attention to pay to the needs and feelings of others.
And that brings me to loving kindness and this art of living, and then to faith. And I guess starting with loving kindness, your earlier book, that idea of being able to open up in an empathic way. I mean, are these realistic ideas? And that's what people will ask. Can you do this in this culture when the reaction to you may not be loving and kind? Tell us about that.
One of my models for this is actually this woman Aung San Suu Kyi, who's the leader of the democracy movement in Burma, and has been under house arrest or arrest
For all of these years.
All these years, and has made so many tremendous sacrifices. Her children were quite young, growing up in England with her husband. She didn't see them for many years, and tremendous tragedy, you know, maybe most powerfully so when her husband was dying, and he wasn't allowed a visa to get in to see her and say goodbye. And through all these years, she has stayed in Burma rather than leaving, even though it seemed pretty obvious she could leave, because it was also obvious she couldn't get back in, and because she was and is the hope for democracy of the Burmese people, she has stayed. And she once wrote something about loving kindness. She said, "I and the members of my party often talk about loving kindness because we have experienced what happens when beings are lacking in loving kindness, when they have been made the object, when they've been dehumanized, when their own feelings were not seen as viable or authentic." And she said, because we have been the object of nature's lacking in loving kindness, we've become even more committed to loving kindness.
Fascinating.
Which, you know, I don't see as a sentiment or an emotion or even
but
a
necessity.
Feeling. It's a necessity and it's a vision of life.
We always talk about repentance. And I had a teacher say once, the greatest repentance is when that same situation, and it will, recycles, don't behave in the same negative way. Open your heart and change. Choose to change.
Well, the good news, Gail, I think, is that there are methods that do that. And, you know, there's new research that show that those methods actually change the neural connections in the brain.
And you're bringing me to my next question, because I was present at that MIT symposium with His Holiness and many of these lamas and Nobel Prize winners, scientists in many fields, including education, and this 3-day jewel where we now know that, and this is your work, that immunities go up when people are feeling good and happy and meditate, and they hold images longer and they think better, have more capacity. Tell us about this next thing that you're doing, that you've done in a certain way, connecting spirituality and neuroscience.
You mentioned the study where they took people who were really hassled at work, a very high-pressure, high-tech company. They taught them mindfulness, which is the method that Sharon teaches, and John Kabat-Zinn, a very gifted teacher, came once a week and got these people, volunteers, to spend about a half hour a day doing this meditation. And Richard Davidson, who's a really top-level neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin, measured their brains and their immune system before and after. And he found something really wonderful. He found that the set point for happiness shifted. When you're really hassled and stressed out, you tend to have more activity in the right side of the prefrontal cortex, just behind the forehead. When you're feeling really great, really mellow, what a good day, I could do anything, energetic, you have a lot of activity on the left. And what he found was in 8 weeks, they shifted from the right toward the left. That's a set point that had been thought never to change, by the way, through life. They also found that people's immune response, immune strength, went way, way up.
I mean, I'm remembering 1,000%. Could that be correct? Was it that much?
It was quite significant.
Yes. I don't want to have a gross exaggeration here.
I'll leave it to you.
But I remember it was very
there was
high.
another data point that I think you'll like a lot. This was just announced last month at the new meeting. An article in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science by Davidson, 8 very long-term meditators. These were Tibetan lamas who came to his lab, and they did brain imaging studies, and they found that while they were meditating on loving kindness,
interesting,
their center for happiness was the most active part of the brain.
Yes.
It makes
Amazing.
you feel good, and also the center that prepares you to be ready to act,
Yes.
presumably to help if
Right.
the opportunity comes.
Right.
So it's not just that you feel good, but you're ready to help someone else in the moment.
I think the most important piece of that is that the average person right off the street can be taught these techniques.
We can begin today.
And immediately
Anybody.
get results.
Absolutely.
Anybody. They don't
Yeah.
have to be a lama that's done this all of their life.
Nope.
They can be just a normal, average person off the street and still gain these tremendous benefits.
And you don't need a prescription.
And you don't need a prescription. You know, I have a friend who always says, you know, this is so easy. Why in our culture do we always reach for these other things? You know, the caffeine
Sure,
and
exactly.
the aspirins, and when here it's all within us. And that is really what your book Faith is about. Tell me, what was your conclusion from researching and experiencing faith?
Well, one of the most powerful experiences I had about faith was living here in New York City and teaching after September 11th, 2001. And, you know, I just had a hugely traumatized population of people that I so much wanted to try to help. And I was very inspired one day. I was teaching a class, and a young man came up to me and asked at the end if he could walk out with me because he had some kind of technical questions about meditation. So we walked out together, and then at the bottom of the stairs he turned to me and he said, you know, I'm a fireman. And he said, I was there at the World Trade Center, and the building basically collapsed on me. He said, I survived, and many of my friends did not. And then he said to me, I don't want my life to end here. I want to find a way to go on.
Wow.
And that became one of the deepest representations of faith to me, because I didn't use the word. I didn't want to use the word as everything's going to be just fine, or you know, that sense of dogmatically adhering to a set of beliefs and excluding others, and all the many ways that the word is used. I wanted that precise sense that there's something in us that can go on, that understands change is always possible. It can't be predicted, you know, exactly what direction things will change, but change is happening. It's always happening, and there can be that openness in us, not feeling defeated, not feeling despair. And I also saw faith as a kind of connection. It's connecting to our own deeper strengths, and it's connecting to one another.
You know, it makes me think the Dalai Lama was asked about being a Buddhist, and he said, I was born a Buddhist, so I'm a Buddhist. But my favorite religion, he said, is kindness. And in fact, isn't that what we're really saying? That regardless of your faith, your religion, your faith, not your religion, but your belief in the positive part of your own resource is really always there. We just have to tap into it, reconnect to it. So you give some techniques for that. Give us a simple meditation technique that we can all do as a beginning.
Probably the most fundamental practice would be to sit down quietly, close your eyes, and feel your in and out breath, to get in touch with the feeling of the breath. And as simple as that sounds, it's awfully hard to do, because what we discover is that it's not so easy to be with one breath. What I found, for example, in my early experience was that, well, Dan was sitting there looking like he was, you know,
really there.
I was thinking about what I would have for lunch today.
You know, I couldn't do it. You know, as soon as this breath was happening, I'd find myself leaning forward to get ready for the next, which was, in a way, my mental posture in life. And I really had to learn to relax, to let the breath come to me. I found that it wasn't 500 breaths in a row before my mind wandered. It was one or two. And so now when I teach meditation, I really emphasize that moment when we realize our attention has wandered.
Yes.
But in that moment, when we kind of wake up, that's the moment when we have the chance to cultivate some compassion
Yes.
for ourselves.
And you know that idea of compassion for all sentient beings. Of course, you are a sentient being.
Indeed, yes.
Well, do you remember the moment many years ago at the Mind Life conference that I was at in
Sharon was
Dharamsala?
also participated, yeah.
Yeah.
When I had the opportunity to ask the Dalai Lama a question, and I said, Your Holiness, what do you think of self-hatred? And he said, what's that?
Wonderful.
And this amazing discussion ensued
Yes.
because he was absolutely puzzled.
Yes.
He said, is it some kind of nervous disorder?
He'd never heard of it.
Yeah, it was just
It's
like,
a foreign concept to him.
When he was at Rice, His Holiness, someone asked him what the secret of life was, and we all were sitting there thinking some profound pearl of wisdom was going to just, and something profound did, something simple and profound. He said, be happy. And
Good advice.
Good advice. Well, I know that we're out of time. I wish we weren't. So, Daniel Goleman and Sharon Salzberg, you have shown us the connection between science and spirituality as a bridge to health and wholeness in the 21st century. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for watching. I'm Dr. Gail Gross.
We are PBS.